awesome.
I never really like to contact them and make like plans too ahead of time because I don't know what my family will be doing and stuff, but
You never know.
yeah.
It's like a personalized lecture. I feel like she's like a one-on-one class.
Yeah.
Insane. So are you from Minnesota or from New Jersey?
I'm from New Jersey.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I've pretty much never been to the Midwest until I took this job.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did some college visits in high school. And that's pretty much it. Well, and I guess a college visit for grad school. Before I got my PhD, it was like I applied to a bunch of programs in like pretty different fields. So before I accepted my like PhD offer, I was in Chicago, like on the ground, like touring like a conservatory, like gardens, to get a master's in like plant science. And then I got a call that I was accepted into the PhD program, and PhD pay you and masters you have to pay them. So jumped straight into a PhD.
That's awesome though.
But yeah, they don't pay you a lot, but it's
better than
you can live off it, you know.
Yeah, that's good.
Like,
That's kind of the only know what you want.
yeah, I in grad school, like I felt a little behind some of the other people because they had like a bunch of people did come in with masters, but just for the financial stuff, right? Like I think I'd rather work a little harder and not be in debt, right? Like, suffer through feeling a little lost.
I really.
Yeah, I mean it was enough to pay my rent and buy food, right? So,
Probably
yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. But if you actually like want to do, if you don't want to do it, if you do all the work, you have to pay hard to do the work because you don't really want. Yeah, true.
Yeah, I mean, but if you don't want to go to grad school, don't go to grad school.
No.
Right?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Here we're gonna chill and briefly talk about birds. Okay. So birds are our next group to develop flight. They are dinosaurs, as you mentioned. So we see here a cassowary, a live bird, where you can see some very dinosaur looking traits here that reminds us things are weirder than we think they are, right? They also have super scary like claws. They're like aggressive and very large. Yeah. Australia is full of
and then, I was like, but it's not too scary. And then I saw how they attack you. Like they just like jump or like. I mean, chickens do the same.
Birds are frightening.
Like people are like, oh, cute chickens. Yeah, they attack you too.
Yeah. The Romans used to use like geese as like kind of like guard dogs, right? Because
run at you,
yeah. Like if you've ever gone near one, like with their nest, right? They like are territorial, right? So they just convince the goose that their camp is territory.
Never see a goose to like a cage. And there's just all these birds hissing and running at you. Like, wouldn't you be like?
It would be very scary.
Yeah.
And a decent alarm system too, right?
Yeah. You'd be like, oh yeah, someone's trying to get in. You can hear them freaking out.
Yeah. Oh, scary. Okay. So, since we're talking about birds, I pulled up some fun bird memes that I was enjoying. I mentioned before that I really like that dino chicken nuggets are really made of dinosaurs. My favorite facts about birds. I also pulled up this other one because as we're moving into our next unit on the Cenozoic, we'll be talking about human evolution and things like that. So there's have you heard about this famous conversation between Plato and Diogenes?
No.
Yeah, they're both Greek philosophers, right? But Diogenes was kind of like a troll, basically. So they were trying to come up with a definition of a human being, right? What man was. And so it's like, it's a featherless biped. And so the next day Diogenes comes in and he's like, plucks a chicken and like lets it loose. It starts running around. He's like, here's your man. So definitions get tricky. So birds are specialized for flight among our dinosaurs. We don't have a lot of evidence of our other dinosaurs, our non-avian dinosaurs flying, although we've mentioned and looked at that presence of feathers. So figured it was a good time to think a little bit more about the basics of flight and exactly how a bird can fly. So here we see basically like cross sections through the wings of different things. So we've got some planes, some things that I don't know what they are. I don't know what ULM is. Yeah. I suspect that's some other type of plane since we've got a propeller and an airliner, some fan blades here. But basically, in order to fly, you have to generate lift. So the way this happens is that as plane or a bird or some other flying thing is moving forward, the shape of the wing means that when you're moving forward, the curvature of the top part means that air has to travel faster in order to get over the top of the wing than the air below the wing has to travel, right? Because there's this curvature to the wing that expands that kind of area on top. So the difference in speed as you're propelling through the air creates differences in pressure as well. So you end up with like high pressure below and low pressure on top. And then lift, to generate lift, basically the wing and therefore the whole body end up moving towards that lower pressure region. Lots of things in life are just dictated by moving from areas of high to low pressure concentration, whatever. This is a case where we're moving from the high pressure to the low pressure. So this lift is being generated. And this is kind of a property of fluids, sort of. We're thinking about air almost as a fluid here, because this is kind of a fluid property, which is why we also see like a dolphin flipper fin, excuse me, down here. So here we can see in an owl how some of these air currents move around the bird. So gravity would be pulling it down. We have air coming straight at it. Air has to travel over the wings farther than under the wings. So we can see those different pressure gradients kind of being generated here. And we also use the tail as a rudder and the angle of the wings to kind of cut through these air currents in different ways. Now, there are different types of flying. Birds and birds of different species have really different behaviors. They do different things with their wings. Diving birds can do different things. So you can sort out bird wings and bird shapes and associate them with the type of flying they do. So flapping a wing acts like kind of like a propeller. But the main part of flying, like suspending yourself in the air, isn't being generated so much by that flapping as by how you catch the air. So in gliding, kind of self-explanatory from like the English word, but when you're not flapping, you put a slight angle to the wing, directing air downwards. So kind of pushing air down and generating a bit of lift. But over a period of time, if the bird is like not flapping, going to stop moving forward so fast, and the bird is going to move downward kind of gradually over time. Bless you. Another cool thing that birds can do is soaring. So that actually does mean something kind of specific. So that's when birds catch specifically like hot air currents called thermals. So as the air heats up, it kind of heats up unevenly based on how the sun is heating it, right? So you can imagine shade, things like that having effects. Hot air rises. So if birds can find a patch of that hotter air, which they're good at doing, they can basically catch that hot air as it rises and use it to lift them as well. So that is technically what soaring is. They can also catch different wind currents once they get up high. Do all sorts of cool, weird stuff that involves a lot of physics, honestly. But here we see some of the differences in bird wings based on what they do. So you can see this passive soaring wing is really kind of specialized for like catching. Some birds soar but are more active and have more movement and have like a more streamlined kind of wing. Got all sorts of different wing shapes and all sorts of different species that map kind of onto how they move. So in order to fly, we have to generate lift. We also have to be able to power flight. We have to make sure that gravity isn't like pulling us down like a rock. And we have to fuel that flight if we're using our muscles intensely. We have to make sure that the tissues get like enough oxygen and stuff in order to be able to run metabolism, generate ATP, you know, make all the muscle cells work and stuff. So birds have a number of adaptations for flying. One of which is that bird bones are hollow or pneumatized. And we'll take a look at a picture of that. Sometimes this is described as like lightening the skeleton, but really it's a bit more nuanced than that. It does lighten the skeleton from what it would be if it were just purely solid bone, but bird bones are actually like quite dense. So this is kind of like a trade-off between like stiffening the bone, but not making it super, super heavy. They also have a lot of specializations in their respiratory system. So in a typical mammal, only about a 20th of the body is devoted to respiration, right? So your lungs aren't that big. But in a bird, it's a fifth of the bird. So those lungs are attached way, way back in the bird. And they have a different kind of type of breathing than we do. So they have front and rear air sacs, and they kind of just breathe all in a single kind of loop. They have a specialized like one breath, two breath kind of rhythm that pumps air into these different air sacs and then pushes it out on different breaths. And some of those air sacs even go into the bird's hollow bones. So like parts of that inner hollow layer of the bone actually have some like respiratory capacities. So like doing gas exchange and stuff. Their heart, like ours, is four-chambered. So that doesn't sound exciting because we also have a four-chambered heart, but that's not necessarily the case in all other animals. Fish and amphibians have a two-chambered heart. A four-chambered heart is really good for dividing oxygenated and deoxygenated air, and not everything has to do that. That's like metabolically very helpful because it means that you can send out blood that's better oxygenated if you don't have mixing between the two types of blood. But you can survive with like partially deoxygenated blood and kind of mixing. And there are some conditions in people that lead to lower levels of oxygenation with different types of sort of heart defects. But birds have a special heart, like us. They have four chambers. They also have super fast heart rates. So to get oxygen out to their bodies, our typical heart rate is whatever It is. Mine is apparently 98 right now. Not too high, not too low. I don't know. But that's just a reference point for the heart rate of a bird. So things that are smaller do tend to have faster heart rates in general. But birds do have noticeably fast heart rates. So that's not a typo. That's 1,200 beats per minute for an actively flying hummingbird, which is kind of insane.
Yeah, you always like know like species have like faster heart rates. There was even like as a baby, like
Mm-hmm.
when like baby like think the heart rate is like faster.
Yeah, the ones I know examples of do. Like I don't have in my mind a counterexample, but I'm not going to swear that there isn't some weird tiny thing with a super slow heartbeat, right? Because I don't know all the things that exist. But yeah, I think the thing with the fastest heart rate is like some tiny little shrew or something in general. Yeah. I mean, sorry, I'm trying to think about why that is, right? But if you kind of think about size of hearts, right? If you have to pump blood everywhere, if you have like a little teeny heart, you can only fit so much of it in there at once.
Isn't this like the heart size and like body ratio determines the heart rate because it's all about the blood pressure and you have to like circulate the blood throughout your body. So it's not necessarily the size your body does, but like the
Mm. That makes sense because it would be about like the amount of blood you have
to get
Yeah.
to where.
Yeah. Birds are also warm-blooded, which is helpful for flight when you think about like temperatures in the air, right? Like you go to the top of a mountain, right? Like it's usually colder, right? Like that's why we have those pictures of snow-capped mountains, right? So as birds rise in the air and get higher up, it's important that they can thermoregulate and maintain their body temperatures because otherwise, um, you don't want them turning into an icicle when they get like high enough to get an air current. General consensus is that dinosaurs overall were warm-blooded. So we talked briefly about the fact that dinosaurs partially survived during a period of glaciation, right? And we think there were maybe some species that were kind of cold adapted at the poles and then radiated from there. There are arguments about exactly how their metabolism and such worked, but this is probably an inherited characteristic from dinosaurs. And then also they have this streamlined kind of aerodynamic structure for reducing drag, basically reducing friction, letting them move streamlined through the air. So here we see that picture of kind of what's going on with the bones. So when we say bird bones are hollow, like some of your bones are hollow too, right? We have marrow cavities where we produce red blood cells and stuff. So if you do cut through the middle of this bone, looks like a femur of some kind, right? You would end up with a hollow patch. So when we say bird bones are hollow, what we really mean is they have like really big air pockets. So trabecular bone in a mammal and in a human, like near the ends of bone, you have some little struts and it would look kind of spongy. It's sometimes referred to as spongy bone. But in a bird, you have these like really stiff, kind of dense struts and large air pockets kind of throughout. So you can see how that looks kind of like, I don't know, melted cheese. Have you ever like microwaved some shredded cheese? Makes really good like kind of tortilla chip replacement if you do it long enough. But yeah, that's what's going on in the bird bones. This is partially important because the bone that does exist is quite dense to withstand the forces of flying. So helpful to have it kind of condensed into very specific regions and then make the rest of it light. And also, to some degree, air flows through some of the bone. looking at specific bones of the skeleton, there are features in birds that are particularly specialized and associated with their like strong muscle attachment. So their wings are being powered by chest muscles, basically, right? Their wings are their arms, essentially. So in order to do that, they have to have the musculature in their chests to move their wings and to move their wings like against the force of air. So they're really pushing on a lot of stuff. Yeah. So one feature that we see in the skeleton then is fused collarbones. So if you at Thanksgiving like look for the wishbone in your turkey or something. I've never actually done this. Have you done this?
I've done it.
And people like pull them and
Yeah. Whoever gets like the biggest part.
yeah. I've always seen that in like TV shows or movies, but
I actually like every time I see one,
Mhm.
they're like getting chicken or something. I always do it with like the person.
yeah,
I can tell what side's getting great
yeah,
because usually you can
like one size
tell like
thinner
where
or something.
like where the bottom has more.
Like whether it's
tension.
gone like this or like that.
So, I mean, most people don't look at that, but it's really funny to do with little kids. Like, I bet that my side's looks great, and yours is, and then they think you're magic because you knew what size because it's a wishbone, you know. So
Yeah.
you're so cool now.
I
Yeah.
like that. Do you have to dig hard to get them out? No.
Really? I mean,
Sorry, I'm just planning.
just like the front.
Yeah,
part
it's just the front
of
part.
every
You just kind of
bird.
go grab in there.
Yeah, it usually just getting it off the top part without like. Yeah, there's sometimes like
Mm.
I'm just eating out of my mouth,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, look.
Maybe I'll study a math. The odds that I get asked to carve a turkey this year are like somewhat high.
I think you should try to figure out by looking at it what side you think will break.
Yeah.
Like 80% of the time I'm right. And it's just about like you can tell a little bit which side has more tension on it. And like if you were to break it in half,
Mhm.
like we just
Right,
got it.
Yeah, because normally like this thin one, like on like this bone, like break.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like,
So there's a side that's like thinner than the other.
and
I wonder.
most of the time they're like pretty even, but like you said, like sometimes like the bottom part has a tiny bit more like
Mhm.
string like in here.
Hmm.
You know that this one's gonna break.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then that's the one that gets like the bigger bone. They disappear.
I was just thinking, I was like wondering if birds are handed, you know?
Oh my god.
Because that's like built into humans, like the proportion, like lateralization,
Yeah.
right? It's in our brains even, right? And you'd think a bird wouldn't be like have handedness because it's got to
No.
fly with both wings.
Well,
But on the other hand, like
they
I am handed, right? So like I use one hand to like support and one hand to like move stuff.
And they'll be like, you know, they do
Yeah.
turn and like
Right. Do
Yeah,
they have
which
one
side?
wing that they like to lead with more than the other?
A study of 16 Australian parrot species, scientists found that about a half were lefties, a third were righties, and a few were
Okay. So like
So they-
not handed at the species level, but like at the individual bird level, yes,
Yeah.
if they could determine.
but we're not a species.
We actually are, right? Like it's 90% or 80% right-handed or something.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
like, I mean,
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you're born, it's not like predetermined, like
Yeah.
what you're gonna be.
Like it might be actually a little bit because like
Yeah,
other
yeah.
species, there's more of a 50-50 split.
It really?
Yeah.
Yeah,
because
and
I
it
think,
like has to do with
inside,
like brain lateralization too, right? Like you can see it even in
Yeah.
the brain, not just like in the body.
Yeah, I think it is, but
I wonder what in your development would affect that.
Yeah.
it's insane. My mom is left-handed, and then my grandpa is left-handed, and then like my uncle is left-handed, but I'm right-handed.
So people who can write with both hands are feeling too.
I think so.
I can draw.
I jammed my thumb like once in grad school, so I switched to like a lefty mouse and like all my lefty
Oh.
stuff while my hand was braced, and I felt very cool. I was like, now I'm cool. Now I'm gonna be ambidextrous.
One time
have like a injury in my wrist where I have to
Yeah.
wear like a band, but I
Mhm.
couldn't write. So I had to like write, and I looked like a kid. It was like the letters
It's
like
really
this.
hard.
Yeah, making sideways wrong.
Yeah.
But
My handwriting isn't great to begin with my right hand, and then the left hand is
Yeah.
like,
It's really bad. It's like you're it feels like you're writing upside down.
yeah.
I normally do it just to see how good I can get, and I go as
Mhm.
low as I can, and I get like a decent shape. But it takes me
Yeah.
like out.
It just feels wrong to like be told you're making
Sometimes from that experience, like I brush my teeth
It makes you realize
with
how
like
much
my left hand, like I'm
Yeah.
brushing something.
stave off dementia or something by using different parts of your brain.
You know, I don't think that works.
I think they do studies on that sometimes. Yeah. One of the tests for dementia is like, right, can you still read a clock, like an analog clock? And I wonder at what point they're gonna have to like take that off the test because people don't look
I
at
know,
analog
yeah.
clocks enough.
I have
Yeah.
very long.
I always kind of like look at it while I'm taking like tests, and I'm like, okay, I think it is this, but I'm never like sure, so I always like end up asking my professor, and I'm right, but I'm always like, hey, it's funny.
I went through a whole phase thinking like that like a quarter of an hour was like 25. I don't know why,
Right. Well, because a quarter of
Yeah.
100 is 25.
but I like
Yeah.
but I went through a whole phase like a year of my life where I forgot that it's 15, and so I'm sitting here.
Oh no, good thing they give you the test then.
No, it was bad. It was bad because then I was sitting there one day and then I was late for something with my family. They were like, we told you to be here at a quarter after, and I'm like, I am. And they're like, no, you're not. And I'm like, what do you mean? And then I realized that I was dumb. No, I was kidding. But yeah.
But that's what I like about analog clocks, right? Is that I actually don't have to think about numbers. I can just like see fractions, right?
Yeah.
So like within an hour, it's nice to just like have a little pie chart of how much time I have left.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
my boss in the office of national programs here, we just got
Mhm.
one of those classes.
Mhm.
To get one of you can only see the hours, because I was like, I just want people to keep
Oh.
learning about how to
Yeah.
work.
And like
yeah,
5
so I have to put in
minutes
a request to
versus 5
fix
minutes
our
on
clock.
this looks so much longer.
Mhm.
Like when you're taking a test and you look up and you see like you still have 5 minutes left, it looks a lot longer.
Yeah.
Than like when you look and you're like, oh, 5
Oh
minutes.
no, that's like 3 breaths.
Yeah, literally.
Anyway, so fused collarbones, making the wishbone. And then they also have a really large sternum, so like the center of the rib cage, that's keeled. So that's referring to like the keel of a boat, that curved part. So this is their breastbone, basically. So this is specific and kind of a specialization to birds. Yeah. Yeah. Weird thing. Okay. Oh, and they also have a number of fused vertebrae in the neck and especially the trunk. Kind of like, for the trunk part at least, like the thorax to stabilize, presumably, during flight, to just like keep everything rigid, kind of without having to expend as much muscle force, I would imagine.
I'm curious in like development, you know, when we were talking about how like when things are in like utero,
Mhm.
they resemble each other.
Mhm.
I wonder when like the split for the collarbone occurs, is that like
Hmm. I wonder if they start with separate collarbones and they fuse together.
that's what
I
I
bet
mean,
it kind of
like,
goes
do
the
they
other
start
way.
like separate like how ours are, or do we separate like how?
I think they start out separate, but I'm not sure when. Well, and part of it is like it says that they're fused, right? So the way bones form,
Sure.
right, they come together. And like even your bones, right? Like that's why you have like growth plates as a kid, right? Because you just got like a long cartilage tube and random little sections of bone that are slowly connecting together. So
Yeah, 'cause
I bet for that reason, right? Like that it starts out separate. Yeah, those like points where they start like little bits of bones. Those are called like ossification centers, and every bone has like
Maybe
different
that's why
numbers
it
of
breaks
them.
at the bottom.
Yeah, maybe that's probably like the fusion point. I mean, also just like where the stress would fall, right?
Yeah.
You can break a paper clip at that part too.
Sure.
So birds also famously have feathers. So we looked at where feathers show up on a tree of dinosaurs, but now we're zooming in a little bit on some of the specifics of what fully formed bird feathers look like. So birds actually have lots of different kinds of feathers specialized for doing different things. And in different regions on their body, right? Like basically they have multiple coats of feathers, there are different tail feathers versus wing feathers, and so on and so forth. Overall generalization, they're made of keratin, so that protein that's also forming things like scales in other animals. They have this branching structure. So they have a central kind of line or like an axis down the feather called the rachis. So that's here. And then they have splits out from the side. So these are technically called barbs. So kind of like thorns, like barbs coming off the side. And then off the barbs, they also have little barbules. And in pennaceous feathers, which are as a generalization, kind of like the feathers on the outside that they're using for stuff like flying, stuff you'd see on a wing. They're stiff and flat, and these barbules kind of interlock the feathers together. Have you ever like separated a bird feather and then like kind of combed your fingers across it and seen how it like zips up?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is that like zipper stuff that's happening with the barbs and the barbules. And so that's specifically on these pennaceous feathers. So plumaceous feathers aren't really for flying. Those pennaceous feathers are good for flying because they're wind-proofing stuff, so air like really skates off. They also waterproof things in swimming birds and water birds. But the plumaceous feathers really have the purpose of keeping the bird warm. So this is that sort of thermoregulatory property of our bird feathers. So we see still kind of like a central line and then some barbs and barbules, but these are much more like filamentous. They're more kind of loosely arranged and just in general, like kind of looser and not as stiff. So they're all about trapping air in little air pockets everywhere. And here we see some more structures of bird feathers. So here we can see those barbs and barbules and even little hooks that kind of hook stuff together. And here we can see the different shapes that you might see somewhere on a bird, which is going to look a fair bit like figures of evolution of feathers as well, because we think that feathers probably started out as a thermoregulation kind of adaptation, just like mammal fur, basically. But we're going from this downy fur feathers to a flight feather, which is really streamlined. And you can also see that like on a flight feather from like the wing, you have unequal sides to that feather, right? This is because they have like a gliding, like a cutting into the wind edge and then a like kind of gliding edge. So they're even streamlined from that perspective. So kind of like a little mini wing within the feather itself. When we're thinking about birds, just like we mentioned with pterosaurs, we're not 100% sure on why exactly they developed flight, or I guess I mean kind of like the progression of steps that led them to flight. So one hypothesis is just like running and leaping and then jumping into the air and kind of flapping. We also talked when we were looking at pterosaurs about like going from the tree and then gliding down as an option. There are also ideas about wing assisted running. So basically like having wings and feathers to kind of make you run faster by flapping and kind of pushing on that air. just like kind of like when you're swimming, right? Like walking through a pool versus like going like this through a pool and scooping the air is a lot more efficient. Sorry, scooping the water is more efficient. Same kind of idea with the wing assisted running. Also, apparently, an idea that it might have been partially to help it run up vertical slopes a little bit. So kind of like, I guess, kind of a climbing adaptation there almost, right? So lots of different ideas. And when we start to see like clear bird fossils, right, versus just like feathered dinosaurs with little filaments, they seem like they can already fly, which is part of why there's a question about this. We haven't, as far as I know, found a like wing that looks like a wing with feathers, but wouldn't have been capable of flight.
So like, when anything that soars, kind of do that though, soars without flight. And like like you can jump off of a tree and glide down, but you can't actually fly.
Yeah,
That kind of
I
like
feel like gliding
that.
makes the most sense to me as like any
Yeah, like if
adaptation.
the dinosaurs are like able to jump and then instead of landing on the face, they're
Yeah.
able to like glide back down, wouldn't that be kind of like a perfect flight?
Yeah. And we saw that in one of the dinosaurs when we were looking at things that are and are not dinosaurs. There was
Yeah.
one that had like gliding, kind of like sugar gliders, right?
Yeah.
I bet there's a size component to this too, though, because like you probably have to be like you can't be above a certain size, right, to climb a tree effectively and then glide down, right?
Yeah, but
Yeah. Yeah. I like the gliding hypothesis as an idea because I think I agree that makes sense from
you could just like
mammals we
jumping
see.
from
Yeah,
jumping from like cliffs or
yeah,
different rocks or whatever, you know,
yeah.
any kind of in the air. Kind of like the top,
Mhm,
you know, just showing they're running and then
mhm.
leaping,
Yeah.
being able to leap, like glide over rocks or
Mhm,
over things.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. I have seen a lot of descriptions of this like wing assisted running. So just in general, this like running idea seems to be pretty popular for birds. So yeah, lots of ideas. So our birds are originating in the Jurassic. So here we see a pretty clear bird fossil from the Solnhofen limestone quarry in Germany. So lots of mines are good places for fossils because you're digging up old rocks. When you're looking for stuff like coal, right? You're getting down this deep before you get to the coal deposits. So the most famous oldest bird fossil is something called Archaeopteryx. So we see that PTER, kind of like in our pterosaurs again. So this wing kind of Greek root here, archaeo because it's archaic. So this looks pretty similar to modern birds, but it still has teeth. So that's one cool weird thing that birds have lost since their dinosaur origins. It does very clearly have wings with feathers already. You can see that we'll take a look in a second, but its hand here isn't fused up like we're going to see in modern birds. A lot of the skeleton is pretty clearly linked to the theropod dinosaurs, which is the group within which we see our birds kind of evolving. So it has a long bony tail like our theropod dinosaurs. You can see clawed fingers, also linking it to our theropods. There are also features in its ribs, like it has some ribs in the abdomen and it has a longer kind of S-shaped neck that also kind of link it to theropods, although I don't think those are characteristics I particularly highlighted for us when we're talking about theropods. But seeing this fossil that obviously is on the line to birds, but so clearly has skeletal adaptations that look very, very, very like theropod dinosaurs is how we kind of make our interpretation of birds as arising out of this group. So birds are still archosaurs, and they are descended from our theropods, which is why if we're referring to dinosaurs in cartoon shows or something, best to refer to them as non-avian dinosaurs, since dinosaurs as a whole needs to include our birds. Our oldest birds are therefore going to have all of our archosaur synapomorphies. So ancient birds have teeth set in sockets, so that pecodont dentition. They have an antorbital fenestra, so that hole in front of the orbit. They have a hole in the mandible, mandibular fenestra. And they also have a ridge on their femur called the fourth trochanter, and it is a specific ridge, which is kind of a archosaur characteristic that then when it looks sharper and has a specific form to it is a specific kind of dinosaur characteristic, actually. So here we can see some of the adaptations that lead us up to what birds look like today. So we start out with a Theriskian pelvis, actually, because we think that birds are coming from the theropods, which we have within our Saurischian dinosaurs. Sauropods aren't all that much like our birds, but our theropods our theropods are bipedal and have this long S-shaped kind of neck. And this is actually where we start to see some of those hollow bones and some of those specializations for different types of breathing. We actually do think dinosaurs did the same kind of air sac thing with their lungs as we see in modern birds. Within the theropods, we saw that some of these examples for sure include filamentous protofeathers, although we also saw some feathers in some of our ornithischians. So whether these filaments are kind of like across the dinosaur tree and maybe lost in the dinosaurs where we don't see them is subject to debate. Then we start to see, as we move towards aves is our group of birds specifically, we start to see the wrist bones kind of change shape and fuse up. Then we actually do see symmetrical feathers with a vein in the center and those barbs kind of out to the side. Asymmetrical feathers for flight with that kind of like leading edge and a gliding edge appear before we get to this fossil that we're focused on right now, the Archaeopteryx, which we're considering our first bird. And then within birds, we see a bunch of typical bird characteristics, including that heeled sternum that we took a look at. I wanted to pull out just an example of a theropod arm versus a bird arm. So when we were looking at pterosaurs, we defined the propatagium as this part of the wing, like basically in front of the arm. And then we had that uropatagium between the back legs. So birds are going to have a propatagium as well. So it's going to be in the front of the wing, kind of tucked there. And it's highlighted in red, basically where we think this structure has come from. So in our theropods, we've got this kind of skin flap or muscle flap that's highlighted here. And in the birds, we're really forming this full, larger kind of muscular structure with the feathers sliding out behind. So we can see that beginning of the propatagium even in things like Velociraptor, or this larger group called Maniraptorans, of which Velociraptor is an example. So we can start to see that kind of changing shape as we move into our birds. So for our feathers, we once thought the feathers were special to birds, but now we know that There are feathers across our theropod dinosaurs and also even potentially in some of our other groups. At least for sure we see like downy kind of filaments, exactly what we want to call a feather. We wait for the like branching pattern. Maybe we have to get into theropods. But feathers, not just in birds for sure. We see it arising before our birds kind of break off. So I think this initially involved for that thermoregulation, so keeping them warm, and then secondarily modified to help with flight. Looking at a feather, here we're looking at the comparison of how like feathers attach to bone in a live bird versus some of the traits we see on Velociraptor. So Velociraptor, still a non-avian dinosaur within our theropod groups, but in that group that's leading towards birds. So what we're looking at are these structures called quill knobs. Their presence in modern birds is variable, exactly what they look like. Some birds don't have them, but when you see a quill knob, you're pretty sure there was a feather attached there. They don't form for some other reason. So those quill knobs are where we have ligaments connecting flight feathers from the wing to the bone itself. So they're anchor points, basically. And we can see some of these quill knobs or something that looks like quill knobs on the bones of even Velociraptor, which is some more of the evidence for Velociraptor among some of our other dinosaurs having feathers. So here we have a diagram illustrating the stages of feather evolution. So you can kind of see what I mean about how those like types of feathers look a lot like kind of how we're interpreting the evolution of feathers to occur. So starting out with just a single filament, so like kind of like a hair, and then several of them joining together at the base. So now we have like a little clump of filaments, and then starting to create this structure where we have a branching pattern coming from a central filament, which in our pennaceous feathers of modern birds and other types of feathers in our modern birds is going to form that central structure and these specializations of the barbs and barbules. So, something else I'm going to put down here. Not really. So we see that multiple filaments and then multiple filaments kind of creating that membrane structure on the outside of the bird. So back to Archaeopteryx, this first bird fossil that we have. So has some features that look similar to reptiles. So for our reptilian features, it has a pretty small brain, it's got a small head. The bones in its hand and pelvis aren't used up. So you can see how it still has fingers, right? So it's got 3 fingers, which was typical in our raptors, in the theropod dinosaurs. You can see that lunate wrist bone here attaching those fingers. Had teeth, so you see teeth in that jawbone. Modern birds don't have teeth, they just have beaks. Here we can see that shoulder girdle, so like the bracing for the wing. You can see here that those clavicles don't look used up to me anyway. Its sternum is actually still kind of small and separate. We see the Saurischian pelvis here. So even though our Ornithischian dinosaurs are bird pelvis dinosaurs, confusingly, birds come out of the lizard hipped dinosaur line, which we can partially see based on the hip in this kind of transitional form. Also still has a long tail, and there's some differences in fusion in the leg and foot as well. So we got some stuff that's different, but we do see feathers. Oh, I guess that clavicle is fused up. Okay, that must be looking at the shoulder blade over to the side then. Yeah, so we see clear wing structures, even though a lot of these other adaptations haven't kind of come into play yet. Here we're looking at the tail of Archaeopteryx versus a modern bird. So you can see it looks a little more kind of simplified, right? We've just got some basic sort of blunt looking feathers coming off of those vertebrae essentially, versus in a modern bird, we have a bunch of fused up vertebrae here, and then those tail feathers all kind of coming off the end. But we're still producing like a rudder-like kind of tail structure here on our way. And here we see a modern bird skeleton with those fully formed bird features here. Looking at the dove. So you can see how that hand is fused up here in our modern birds. Legs are more fused up, things like that. The vertebrae fused up as well. When we're looking at bird skulls, there are things we can look at as well. So just in general, when we're looking at a skull, we have occipital condyles articulating the skull with the vertebral column, so skull resting on the vertebrae. In reptiles and birds, there's just one. In mammals, you have two, so one on either side of this big hole at the base of the skull. So that's a similarity between these groups. When we look in their ears, we also see a characteristic that's common to reptiles and birds, but not mammals. So we just have one middle ear bone in birds and reptiles, but mammals have three. When we look at the jaw, so we've talked a little bit about jaws without naming all the bones of them, other than the predentary we talked about in our ornithischian dinosaurs last time. But here's the kind of bone breakdown in reptiles, birds, and mammals. So reptiles and birds have 5 bones that are coming together in the structure of their jaw. A mammal just has a single bone forming the entire mandible. I think these structures move kind of back towards the jaw joint and towards the ear and become other things. Other similarities we see are that the eggs of reptiles and birds are similar. They have yolk. You don't have a yolk? Yeah, go ahead and say you don't have a yolk. Some of their ankles are part of the tarsal bones, so those are bones that are in your foot itself, in you, but it's in the ankle in a bird or in a reptile. Bird legs are scaled. They have nucleated red blood cells. Your red blood cells do not have a nucleus. They have a specific type of keratin that's making up their skin and scales. And some of their waste products are similar as well. So instead of producing urea, they produce uric acid. And here we're looking at those air sacs again. Now we're comparing the air sacs in the birds to air sacs in a theropod dinosaur. So here we see those anterior air sacs and posterior air sacs. We have evidence for them here in our dinosaurs. So we think that we would have had that same kind of breathing style developing earlier on. Birds also have a structure called a glycogen body in them. I have not been able to find a clear function of the glycogen body, so I am going to say that we still do not really know what the glycogen body is necessarily for, but it is a bird characteristic. And we have found evidence for the glycogen body in our dinosaurs as well. So would be cool to know what it does. But we can find kind of like its attachment points. Archaeopteryx is not our only bird fossil. So in China, they've been unearthing a lot of feathered dinosaurs, which is part of what kicked off this interpretation of lots and lots of lots and lots of species of dinosaurs having feathers. So here's another one. This is Caudipteryx. So it has a beak-like kind of snout. It's starting to lose its teeth, but it still has a couple in the front and the upper jaw. It's cool looking. See this kind of fan-like tail. You can see these. Here's another timeline of the evolution of our birds. So really the only example that I want us to know is Archaeopteryx here, kind of at the base, because that's our most famous one. But if you are looking for other bird fossils or fossil species to dig into in terms of species for like your final project or something, here are some other examples that you can look into. And here we see the traits of birds kind of evolving over the tree. So the ankles, the bipedal posture arising with our dinosaurs, including these wolf filaments, then our wishbone, more veined feathers, wings. Then we see the tail starting to fuse up, and then we see the keeled sternum arising as we're moving into our birds. And there was a timeline on that last figure, I should point out, right? So this is matching up Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, our three periods of the Mesozoic that we're thinking about. So you can see how this is going through time. We think our fully formed birds are maybe arising at the end of the Jurassic or in the early Cretaceous there. Here's just another timeline. Archaeopteryx does date from that late Jurassic period. And then more of our fossil birds that we can see to kind of look at the progression are from the Cretaceous, and then we see an explosion of diversity in birds actually after the mass extinction event at the end of the Cretaceous. So you can see them really radiating out here after that extinction. But our oldest penguin coming before that, which is cool and weird. So a suggestion for why birds survived this extinction event is actually about their beaks. So they have beaks without teeth, and then they have powerful gizzards. It's like another digestive structure. So one idea is that they were better able to like crush and process tough seed. So they had like an expanded kind of food source potentially available to them that might have survived disasters kind of happening at the end of the Cretaceous. Finally, I pulled some stuff out about the Chickenosaurus project, suggesting that there may be differences in what people are hoping will happen with the Chickenosaurus project versus the disaster that we might actually see for a toothed little chicken here. Yeah. Yeah, the guy in charge of this project is famous, but also kind of famously controversial. Here's another chicken experiment that they have done. They have not fully created our Chickenosaurus. But to look at dinosaur walking, one thing that they did was put fake extra long heavy tails on a chicken, right? To see how it changes the movement of how the bird walks. So like our bird is kind of more upright like this, but you can see how when you add a big long tail on, it's kind of holding itself parallel to the ground. One of the things I think they use for like track lays. Yes, it does.
It's so sad. You can tell it's sad. It's like, oh, this is
Yeah, this is embarrassing.
You're like to do this for the 12th time today.
Yeah. I like biology experiments because they're so funny. Anyway, so here are ideas about what our Chickenosaurus or our dino chicken might might look like. They actually have succeeded at like turning on and off some of these genes. So
Like chicken
this,
now.
yeah.
I would be terrified of that.
yeah, we're actually kind of at the end of time, but there's a video about this whole project and kind of updates on it. So they talk at some point about the genes that they have succeeded and not succeeded in turning off and on. Seriously? That video. So I just wanted to make a comment about this guy who's trying to fund and do the Chickenosaurus project. Like, he's famous basically because he's like the technical advisor for all the Jurassic Park films. I mean, he is a real paleontologist and described the Maiasaurus, so nesting dinosaur. That was the one where maybe there was like paternal care happening there. He was really famous to the point that apparently he inspired partially one of the characters in Jurassic Park. And he's a inspiring story because he actually kind of didn't finish his degree, partially because he didn't realize he had dyslexia and was really struggling. And so a lot of his degrees are kind of like honorary degrees after the research that he's done in various museums. But also he's like 90 and married a 19-year-old undergrad who was one of his interns at the museum. So like, which like checks out for a guy who's like really invested in building a Chickenosaurus.
Oh my God.
Kind of.
Yeah,
You can see.
yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, so people have thoughts about that, and in general, not
she was
great thoughts.
underrated,
Right.
but
Yeah.
she was young.
Like, I mean, I think we mainly feel bad for her because she's like really invested in science and paleontology and like
It's
being
the
wrapped.
curiosity of maybe that person.
Yeah, and being like wrapped up in this whole scandal, I have to imagine is like
That would be hard.
very harmful for her career, probably.
Yeah, and like mental stuff.
Yeah, and like if he's kind of like your boss,
And
right?
he's like famous.
Yeah, so I still think the Chickenosaurus project is really cool because I want to see a dinosaur chicken with teeth and all sorts of weird stuff.
I'm so scared though. But if they make that, I'm not.
Yeah.
You just keep making sketchy stuff and then it's gonna be all Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Movie. You know, I'm convinced that that's like a possibility. Like not
Jurassic Park
not like
or a
to the
Like you still like
extent
make
that-
like dinosaurs that.
mhm.
like to make Jurassic Park, but like not to the extent in which they did it.
Yeah.
But like I could definitely see that being done. Like it starts as a research lab and like they start making these things.
Mhm. Yeah, they're like using CRISPR for it, right? They're like, great, now we can just make genes and insert.
Yeah, and then they just start making like little things that are only like this big, but
Mhm.
then like,
Maybe I'll go figure.
they're like, oh, guess
Right.
we can now pull this DNA from this thing and make it bigger. Yeah.
Alright.
But
It's exciting.
Like-
I mean, if we're already just like, ruining the planet.
Yeah, we might as well start
Like, we might as well do some cool stuff. Why don't we